Okay, well, welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. I am, as usual, Jodelle, and I am happy to have, once again, Dr. Peat with me. It's wonderful to have you, Dr. Peat. How are you?
Very good.
Awesome. Well, you are so generous with your time, so I have to ask you a question. What drives you to be so passionate in helping people understand their bodies?
I want to understand how bodies work, and you never understand everything, and hearing people's perspective gives me information.
Well, I agree. We can never stop learning, so I'm passionate to learn from you as we keep moving forward. And I think everybody's going to really love the show today. It's all about sleep. I've compiled quite a few questions from listeners for you, Dr. Peat, related to sleep, insomnia, and possibly the anxiety around sleep. So we appreciate all that you're going to share with us today. But before we jump in, I highly encourage you guys to sign up for his newsletter. And you can either get that by regular mail or through email. And I literally get excited like a toddler given a new toy, Dr. Peat, when I see your newsletter in my mail. So I'm always like, oh my gosh, there it is. So I just really want to encourage people, with as generous as you are, we can give back to you and learn from you at the same time. So do you want to briefly just share with them how they can sign up for your newsletter?
The email address for doing it is raypeatsnewsletter@gmail.com, and to get it by email, it's $28 for 12 bi-monthly issues covering 2 years.
Yeah, awesome. And I so think that is worth it for the amount of knowledge that you give us in those newsletters. So I highly encourage it, you guys. So let's jump right in, Dr. Peat. The first question is mine. Is there one main root cause behind most sleep issues, or is it a potpourri of reasons when it comes to someone having trouble sleeping? What's your thoughts?
Often the immediate thing is fatigue that has depleted your glycogen stores, making your digestive system overactive, and then the immediate thing is irritation from your intestine bothering you during the night and causing your adrenaline to keep you awake. But behind all of that, it's almost always a problem of energy metabolism, specifically low thyroid function. Your liver needs thyroid chemically in the local cells to activate the enzymes that convert glucose into glycogen. And your body, in the liver, muscles, brain mostly, your body stores more than half a pound of glucose in the form of glycogen. And in good health, that's enough to keep your system going through easily 8 to 12 hours. But if something is especially fatiguing or irritating, or if your thyroid function is blocked in some way, then you don't have enough stored glycogen to get you through the night, and that means that your adrenaline has to increase to squeeze out any remaining glucose from your tissues. And when that fails, then your cortisol rises, and everyone has a normally high peak of cortisol around dawn, because by the end of the night, most people are having some depletion of their glycogen.
That part about digestion is really fascinating. So these people eating heavy meals before they go to bed and expecting to get a good night's sleep, that's probably not going to happen, right?
Right. Too much fat along with carbohydrates that are hard to digest. Vegetables, beans, grains, nuts are especially irritating because they're slow to digest, and promote the formation of endotoxins when the bacteria grow on them.
So then the endotoxin, I would assume, is increasing serotonin, and elevated serotonin is increasing cortisol, or is cortisol coming first, and how is that kind of agitating the body?
Right. Serotonin and histamine are released first in the intestine, but then if the endotoxin starts poisoning other tissues, every tissue in your body can produce serotonin and histamine when they're under energy distress. And then the serotonin is probably the main activator of cortisol production.
Well, I think people are going to really like this podcast because some of these questions that they've asked are going to pertain to what you're talking about. But also, just to jump in about like the timing of meals before you go to bed, like what's your thoughts on how soon someone should be done eating before they go to bed to help with that problem?
Keeping your carbohydrate intake at least moderate, and later in the day going heavier on the carbohydrate. It's similar to athletes preparing for an endurance contest. They stuff themselves on carbohydrates, doing something like that, like having a more carbohydrate in relation to your protein in your last meal of the day. It prepares you for the endurance, getting you through the night asleep. People who are having a particular problem, if they haven't eaten anything that is really causing inflammation in their intestine, if they just feel that they've been doing too many exciting things during the day and depleted their energy stores, sometimes just having a big bowl of ice cream or maybe a whole plate full of marshmallows, some really big load of sugar just before going to bed, that will sometimes put a person to sleep. And since you need sodium to absorb sugar, sometimes sodium is the limiting nutrient. A friend of mine had a little kid that never wanted to go to sleep at a proper time, and I told him about the function of salt. He prepared some very salty water, and at bedtime had his 4-year-old daughter take a sip of it, and she said, "Daddy, why is it so salt?" And before she finished her sentence, she was asleep.
Wow. Okay, so adding salt a little bit just before bed might be beneficial then too.
Yeah, like a bowl of very salty chicken broth is a good bedtime sleep inducer.
Wonderful.
Gelatin itself, even without the salt and other tasty things, gelatin helps to bring on sleep because it tends to support your blood sugar.
Maybe that's why I feel so calm right now, because right before this call I had some chicken bone broth that I made. So. Okay, then the first question I have from a listener is from Betty. She asks, I have trouble every night waking around 2 p.m. Why is this, and what can I do about it?
In one set of experiments, people had a tube put in their veins so that they could sample the blood every 15 minutes. And they found that as soon as the lights were turned out, the adrenaline started rising. And it was the darkness itself, because if the people were still awake, the adrenaline rose quickly. But if they had gone to sleep quickly, when the lights went out, the adrenaline still increased. So the darkness itself is the major cause of the problem that leads to the high cortisol in the morning. And one of the things that prepares you for keeping your blood sugar up during the night is to make sure that you get bright light all day, because that is helping to stabilize your blood sugar and helping to store the glycogen. In that experiment, it only took 15 minutes for darkness to cause the stress, rise of adrenaline.
That's so interesting. So it's maybe a cortisol imbalance through the day. If she's not getting out into sunshine and stuff like that, that could be the reason why she's having that constant wake up in the night.
And the vitamin D, which is cumulative in the summer. At the end of the summer, people tend to sleep better than in late winter. The cumulative effect of short days and long nights reaches its peak about this time. 1st of March is a very bad time because of the cumulative long nights, but also the vitamin D level tends to be lowest this time of year. And vitamin D and good calcium intake work to keep your glycogen up just the same way the thyroid does. Together, vitamin D and a good supply of calcium inhibit the parathyroid hormone. And one of the things that the salt does is to inhibit the adrenal aldosterone, salt-regulating hormone. And inhibiting the aldosterone also inhibits the parathyroid hormone. And those two hormones, aldosterone and parathyroid hormone, interfere with the mitochondria energy-producing system. They knock it down. And when those are inhibited, it's the same as being hypothyroid. And that means that you use your sugar wastefully, forming lactic acid instead of carbon dioxide. And if you measured the nighttime lactic acid, you would find that it rises along with the stress hormones. It's one of the signals for increasing the pituitary stress hormones and cortisol. And all of these things work together, but vitamin D is one of the crucial things that chronically will improve your sleep if you keep it up at least in the middle of the range. One doctor who has some videos on the subject found that I think it was 60 to 70 nanograms per milliliter of vitamin D in the blood that improved the sleep slightly above the middle of the range.
Well done. So I think she would really benefit from some vitamin P and then getting out in the sun during the day. And I can vouch for that. You know, on these dreary, weary days that we have here in the Midwest, I tend to find out that I wake a little bit more frequently in the night because I think of the lack of sun during the day, but it doesn't tend to happen that much in the summer. So I think you're spot on there. Jim G asks, what do you recommend for feeling groggy upon waking? And yet I also seem to have issues falling asleep at bedtime. So it sounds like he's staying awake when he should be going to sleep and he's feeling sleepy when he should be waking up.
That's a typical low thyroid pattern. When your thyroid or vitamin D or anything is impairing your oxidative metabolism, your sleep stays in a superficial, they call it the second phase of sleep rather than the deep, slow wave sleep. And it's the slow wave sleep that repairs your tissues. And so hypothyroid people might sleep 10 or 11 hours and still not be rested. When you're well supplied with energy, thyroid, vitamin D, calcium, then your sleep can quickly get into the deep, slow phase and repair your tissues quickly. And so in 7 or 8 hours, you can be fully restored, wake up alert. But when you don't wake up feeling fresh and ready to do things, coffee and milk is a safe way to get going. The coffee, if it's backed up with milk and orange juice, the caffeine turns off the stress hormones.
Mm-hmm. And with regard to coffee for people that do have sleep issues, are you a fan, if they have like a lot of insomnia or a lot of sleep issues going on, should they stop the coffee altogether or just keep it, to the earlier part of the day? What's your thoughts?
If your liver is very hypothyroid and slow to metabolize things, you might have to stop your coffee in the early afternoon because it will keep circulating the caffeine. But when your liver is able to store glycogen, coffee right up to bedtime can improve the depth of your sleep because it's one of the anti-stress things it does is to act as an aromatase inhibitor. And since estrogen turns on serotonin and histamine and other stress hormones, caffeine, by taking down estrogen, will let your deep sleep come on.
Okay, very good. Carrie asks, what is Dr. Peat's opinion on blue light exposure before bed? I tend to use my phone in bed, before bed, and should I be concerned about the health effects of this?
It isn't a very serious amount from a telephone, but the amount in daylight, it is next to ultraviolet light for toxicity. In plant physiology, since plants habitually are exposed to daylight for the full extent of the day, they looked at the effects of the different colors, and they found that even blue light, not to mention the ultraviolet, but the blue light knocks out plant mitochondria.
Oh, wow.
If it's just a matter of the blue light exposure. And it's the red light which detoxifies the blue light. So plants, because the sun is rich in red light as well as blue, the red prevents the toxicity of the blue and ultraviolet. And other experiments show that it even detoxifies gamma ray poisoning. But the amount of blue light in a phone isn't going to damage your retina unless you look directly at it for hours at a time.
That would be an interesting experiment, just to shine a tablet or a phone on a plant in our house for a length of time and see how well it flourishes. Because, like you said, if it doesn't get that full spectrum light, then it's probably the main reason why people have trouble with houseplants and things like that, because now we have so many LED and fluorescent lights in our home that maybe it's affecting the plants too.
With plant experiments, in college I did a botany experiment with that, and red light alone stimulates photosynthesis and exuberant growth, but it doesn't stimulate the stiffening defense reactions, and so the plant grows up and falls over at limp. But if it gets blue light and ultraviolet, that irritates it enough that it produces the defensive structural cellulose. And if you get too much blue and ultraviolet, the plant gets very stiff and wiry and not very exuberant. So it needs some of the irritation to produce the toughened skeletal growth.
Okay. Renee S. asks, I would like to sleep deeper, and I was wondering if Dr. Peat could touch on what to do about frequent urination at night. I don't necessarily have a full bladder, but it seems when I wake at night, I tend to have to get up and relieve myself, and sometimes it seems like 2 to 4 times per night. How can I help this?
The increase of estrogen under stress is one of the things that does that. It changes the thresholds for the bladder, makes it more irritable. Antihistamines, aspirin and Benadryl, for example, will give immediate relief on that by changing the estrogen-induced irritability of the bladder. But vitamin D and thyroid are probably the basic thing to make your anti-diuretic hormone come on during the night on schedule, and then back off at dawn in the morning. Healthy kids and old people will have a cyclic anti-diuretic hormone during the night that simply turns off your kidneys' urine production almost 100%. And if that doesn't increase during the night, then your kidneys, because you're lying down, the circulation to your kidneys tends to increase. And if you don't have the hormone shutting down their urine formation, then you're actually going to produce more urine during the night than during the daytime. And vitamin D and thyroid are part of the process of getting your pituitary to release the antidiuretic hormone.
Okay, I'm picking up a trend on thyroid and vitamin D, how important those two are. So I hope other people are picking up on this too while you're listening to this. So Jenny asks, are there specific supplements, speaking of, that Dr. Peat recommends to help someone sleep deeper? And one I would like to specifically ask about is a smart drug called Phenibut or Phenibut.
The drugs do work, and that's a fairly harmless one, but caffeine will do the job if you use it properly and integrate it in your schedule. It activates the kidneys, and if you start off breakfast with some coffee and milk and orange juice, that will help to get your kidneys active and reinforce a cycle in which they're very active during the daytime and less active during the night. The particular drugs that act only to regulate sleep aren't as effective for reinforcing the whole energy cycle of high energy during the daytime and stored energy used during the night.
And you said Phenibut was like relatively a harmless drug that you knew of?
Yeah, but I think the antihistamines are better because they work on the mechanism rather than just acting as a sedative. Benadryl and aspirin or Periactin, called the real name is cyproheptadine. Those lower the histamine and serotonin and stop improper excitation, so that the stress hormones are normalized during the night.
And what do you think about certain supplements like taking magnesium before bed or ashwagandha, like adaptogenic herbs and things like that?
The reason thyroid is so effective for bringing on instant sleep is that it allows the cells to retain the magnesium. Magnesium supplements will only work for an hour or two unless your thyroid is up to where it should be. A training on his allergy patients, he found that their symptoms subsided briefly when he gave them intravenous magnesium. But they very shortly after the hour of infusion, their symptoms would come back. But he gave them a little quick-acting thyroid along with the intravenous magnesium, and it cured the allergies. He lost all his patients because they didn't have any more symptoms. And it's the same with sleep. You get a temporary, you can even anesthetize yourself with a big dose of magnesium, but it doesn't cure the problem if the problem is low vitamin D and low thyroid, causing your cells to be unable to retain the magnesium. That's one of the things the salt at bedtime does, is to lower the aldosterone, making you able to retain your magnesium instead of losing it in the urine during the night. And that when I was driving all day, I would have trouble going to sleep, and I found that if I chewed up a 5 or 10 microgram tablet of Cytomel, I would be asleep in about 5 minutes. And on one of my trips, I arrived for the doctor who was going to, he was organizing the talk, and I arrived the day before, and he was in terrible condition. He hadn't been able to sleep, he said, for 3 or 4 days. And I happened to have my Cytomel in my pocket. I gave him, I told him to take a 10 microgram tablet at bedtime. The next day, as I went in to the place where the talk was, he was giving an introduction, but before he let me talk, he pulled me aside and said, "That stuff is better than opium."
Okay. All right, so the next question is from Victoria. Victoria asks, as for a healthy lifestyle, is Dr. Peat okay with sleeping in sometimes, or should we always wake at the same schedule?
Some people do fine with extra sleep, but it can, in many people, it lets the nervous system shift over to emphasize the parasympathetic rather than the adrenergic sympathetic side. And in sensitive people, that can hold the blood sugar down all day, making you feel groggy and even headachy. But if it doesn't have that effect, if you are fully alert after an extra hour or so of sleep, it's fine.
So kind of patient know thyself. If you feel fine after sleeping in, then go for it. If you don't, you might want to rethink it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Olga says, is it true we need 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night? What if I feel fine on 5 to 6 hours of sleep? Is it really harming my health if I have no symptoms of it doing so?
The statistics suggest, yes, that it is doing damage, because the people who, I think it's between 7 to 8.5 hours per night, if they do that, they have the longest lifespan and the lowest symptoms. The short sleepers and the very long sleepers tend to have higher sickness problems.
Makes sense. Okay, I think you're going to like the next question, because you have a teeny tiny listener that always loves to listen to you, and that's my 5-year-old daughter. And she asked a question to you. She said, Dr. Peat, how do you get rid of nightmares?
Avoiding foods that are disturbing is the most common thing. People who eat, for example, a big bowl of overspiced carne with beans, that will often cause nightmares in a person who otherwise wouldn't have them.
And gas. And so, like something like a food, like maybe if it's a big heavy meal before bed?
Yeah. If it's very, very digestible, there's no problem. But often there are spicy things or hard to digest things that will, if you get gas during the night, the pressure from the gas is enough to bring on a nightmare.
Okay, and so are there any vitamin or mineral deficiencies that would cause nightmares?
Many. Any serious deficiency. Starting in the 1930s, one group of experimenters in particular was finding that the liver regulates the hormones, especially estrogen and the stress hormones. 1939 to 1946, they did a series of studies showing that any of the B vitamins, but especially thiamine and riboflavin deficiencies, keep the liver from eliminating estrogen. And they looked at the men coming back from the Second World War, prison camps where they had been very malnourished, and a lot of the men had developed breasts when they were given an abundant diet when they got out, and they found that was because their livers had become unable to excrete estrogen, and men as well as women are always forming estrogen. Men almost as much as women, but the liver, men's livers are much more able to excrete estrogen. And estrogen activates histamine, serotonin, cortisol, all of the stress hormones that will increase symptoms, including nightmares, night terrors, even seizures. Nightmares are like a light version of night terrors, and night terrors are very closely related to nocturnal epileptic seizures. Very low blood sugar, very high estrogen, serotonin, cortisol. Insomnia is just the first stage of those more serious things.
Okay. Yeah, it was interesting because she wanted to know that this morning because she had a nightmare last night. She normally doesn't have them, but she woke up with a nightmare and she was like, ask Dr. Peat. Paul asks, I have sleep apnea and I've been on a CPAP for over 3 years. What is Dr. Peat's take on the possibility of coming off my CPAP, and can you reverse sleep apnea?
Oh, definitely. I've had 2 newsletters related to that, one on sleep and one on progesterone, and I'll probably be doing more. But I first got interested in that over 50 years ago when I was seeing studies that progesterone regulates breathing, and for newborn babies that aren't properly starting to breathe normally, they found caffeine was one thing, progesterone was the other. And so they tried that on adults who were having breathing irregularities, including sleep apnea, and found that they were low in progesterone, and that supplementing progesterone or caffeine would restore their breathing reflexes. And the official dogma of doctors is that the carbon dioxide rises too high. But in fact, very detailed measurements have found that these people people are hyperventilating, blowing out so much carbon dioxide that there is not enough carbon dioxide to stimulate their breathing reflex, and so they will stop breathing until the carbon dioxide builds up. And what progesterone and caffeine are doing is to activate the metabolism so that more carbon dioxide and less lactic acid is formed. And for about, I think, 70 years now, doctors have had great success chemically using a pharmaceutical called acetazolamide, patent name Diamox, that blocks the carbonic anhydrase enzyme. That has been a traditional perfect cure for sleep apnea, showing that it's a carbon dioxide deficiency that causes the failure of the breathing reflex. But behind the progesterone deficiency and the carbon dioxide deficiency, there is the basic deficiency of thyroid and vitamin D. So people, everyone that I have personally known who had sleep apnea problems, corrected it just by taking thyroid.
Awesome. And so he would probably maybe benefit from a little bit of natural progesterone as well, just a little supplementation of that?
Yeah, the progesterone works immediately, so that one dose at bedtime, the person will breathe through the night. But the low thyroid means that you're going to have elevated estrogen, making the need for progesterone higher because it's opposed by high estrogen. Okay. So the thyroid and vitamin D and aspirin and caffeine are things that hold your estrogen under control, so that the amount of progesterone you produce normally is usually enough.
That is so interesting. When I was in my toxic mold time of life that was not very fun, I was having trouble breathing, and that was the time when my progesterone was at its all-time lowest due to the stress my body was under. So I figured that out and was able to start supplementing with progesterone, but that actually does help your breathing. It gets rid of that catch in your breath that starts to show up whenever you're low on progesterone.
Yeah, that was discovered in babies over 50 years ago, that progesterone makes them breathe normally.
Wonderful. Okay, we have an anonymous question asker, and they said, I have a sleep disorder that is aided by medication, but I don't want to be on sleep meds. How does Dr. Peat recommend one going off their sleep medication safely?
Some sleep drugs are addictive, so you have to take that into account. And progesterone has been used for withdrawing from several different kinds of addictive drugs, opiates, and a variety of stimulating pharmaceuticals. But the progesterone supplements are really just another crutch that is safer until you get your own physiology working, which usually requires supplementing, changing your diet so that there's enough protein and calcium and vitamin D, and then increasing or taking a thyroid supplement if that's deficient.
Yeah, sort of going to the root cause, which is generally the thyroid, which is why you needed the sleep medication in the first place, usually because of the disorder. Yeah. Okay, June asks, I wake every morning with bags under my eyes, but yet when I go to bed at night, they're generally flatter, I guess she wrote. So what to do about bags under the eyes in the morning? The water regulation involves
the antidiuretic hormone, and several other hormones, aldosterone, and parathyroid hormone, and prolactin are other things that are involved in that disposition of water. When you get horizontal, the water that tended to be in your legs redistributes and will show up in your face. And then when you're vertical for several hours, it drains out of your face and into your feet. And getting all of these hormones so that they're on a proper cycle, albumin and sodium work together to carry excess water from your tissues to delivering the water to your kidneys. And that should be very active during the daytime. But you don't retain the sodium properly if you're deficient in calcium, magnesium, and thyroid function. A low thyroid person is constantly losing both sodium and magnesium in their urine.
And sometimes I'm aware that water retention has to do with low progesterone. Could she benefit from the kind of water retention around the face with a supplementation of progesterone?
It's pregnenolone and progesterone are the quickest acting things. The lungs are the most dangerous place for water regulating problems to occur. When you're in shock or under extreme stress, the lungs take up water and become waterlogged so that the oxygen has a thicker pathway to get to the blood. And estrogen, in animal experiments, it was found that estrogen in less than an hour would increase the water content of rats' lungs, so that 90% of the ability of oxygen to reach the blood disappeared, 90 to 95% in less than an hour after a big injection of estrogen. And lots of people, poorly nourished, low thyroid, or under stress, will have this high ratio of estrogen to progesterone. And I've seen people in just about an hour shift their water balances when they took a good supplement of progesterone, so that their breathing improved. They started forming urine because their blood started carrying water out of their tissues, delivering it to their bladder.
Okay, so that's something that definitely would be beneficial. Is again, we're looking at thyroid help, and then also progesterone, and probably vitamin D would help her as well, right?
And vitamin A is an essential for all of these things, for making pregnenolone, progesterone, and DHEA.
Wonderful. Okay, Glenn asks, so I think he's talking about not food or supplements, but environmentally. He said, environmentally speaking, I would like to know what Dr. Peat recommends to help improve sleep, such as what kinds of things should have or not have, I think he meant should we have or not have in our bedroom, and also are there habits we are doing during the day that can affect our sleep at night?
Muscular activity, some kind of physical exertion during the afternoon raises your body temperature. It can be weightlifting or just doing squats to make your muscles produce some heat. Keeping your body temperature up in itself spares your glucose for the night. And having bright lights up during all of your daylight hours when you're working, and then dimming the lights when you're starting to prepare for sleep, like maybe half an hour before sleep. Dimming the lights starts turning down your nervous system.
Mm-hmm. And anything that you would say he should have or not have in the bedroom?
A device that ionizes the air. It increases your lungs' ability to remove the serotonin, which is circulating in everyone's blood. And an air ionizer can make a big difference for some people, keeping it right by your close your head of the bed.
Okay. What about an ozone machine? I've seen people buy ozone machines for their bedroom.
If there's any benefit from those, it's the negative air ions, but the ozone itself is toxic to your lungs. And it with an overexposure of ozone, that will have this effect similar to estrogen, inflaming your lungs, causing impaired oxygen absorption.
Okay. And so those are all of the questions I have. Now, I wanted to ask something more towards you, like as far as, like you mentioned how important thyroid is, and I'm assuming thyroid supplementation, since there are so many things that affect our thyroid. Do you still take a thyroid supplement, and what do you recommend?
For about, I didn't start taking it until I think I was 38 or something like that, but since I was about 10 years old, I had suspected that I was hypothyroid, but I couldn't accept the idea because measuring my metabolic rate, I sometimes ate 5 times as many calories as other people. And in a physiology class, I measured my oxygen consumption. The professor thought the machine was broken or something because I was using 5 times more oxygen per minute than proper. So I had trouble convincing myself that I could be hypothyroid. When I finally tried it, within a week or two, I was sleeping more deeply and able to relax, and my caloric requirement dropped by about 50%. And I've seen since then several people, mostly males, who no matter how much they ate, couldn't gain weight. And as soon as they took a thyroid supplement, their metabolism quieted down and became more efficient so that they could put on muscle.
And as far as like the one that you personally take, what is that?
At that time, our Armor had been standardized. They made it from both pork and beef, and tested every batch for potency on mice. So it was an absolutely ideal product that had been existing for almost 100 years. Then the company was sold, and immediately the new companies altered the formula, taking out part of the substance, and the tablet just wasn't behaving the same. So I looked around and I found our first synthetic made by the Armor company called Thyrolar, which chemically imitated their standardized product. And then the new companies stopped distributing that. So I found that a Mexican product called Sino Plus had imitated the Thyrolar formula. And ever since the 90s, when I started using that, this product, which at that time cost less than $1 a bottle, and the Armor Thyroid incidentally cost a penny a tablet, but it was the resales. The pharmaceutical industry isn't satisfied with a 50% markup. They wanted 100-fold markup. And so the Mexican tablets have had less drastic increase from $1. 20 years later, they have increased to $15 a bottle. Mm-hmm. But that's still much more economical, and it's a very reliable product.
Okay, very good to know. And do you supplement a vitamin D too, or are you able to get sun where you are?
In Mexico, it's the only time I don't need it, but in Oregon, I always take 5,000 units a day.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so good to know. And then a little personal question: what time do you go to bed?
What was that?
What time do you go to bed?
What time?
Yeah.
I try to make it close to 10:30. Mm-hmm. The regularity is very important.
Yes.
When I was teaching school and had to be absolutely on time, I found that during a vacation at my normal bedtime, 10:30, if I was trying to do something else, my metabolism would shut down and I would get cold.
Oh, yeah. That happens to me. I try to go to bed by 9, and if I don't, I get cold too, so that's interesting. And then are you an early riser, or do you like to sleep in a little bit?
I try to get 8.5 hours every night.
Good. Okay, well, you have answered so many questions. I'm sure everybody will love this podcast because sleep is such a major issue that so many people are dealing with. So I hope you guys found this valuable. Once again, make sure and sign up for Dr. Peat's newsletter and stay tuned for more of these. I love when you do this with me, Dr. Peat. I really appreciate this, and it's fun for me to learn so much from you, so I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, well, I'll say goodbye for now, and we will reconvene at another time. Thank you so much, Dr. Peat.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. What's up, YouTube followers? Just a quick promo code for you of my show sponsor, dropandfbomb.com. You can get healthy oil packets like coconut oil, MCT oil, and their little pork sticks, salt and pepper pork sticks, no hormones, no nitrates, no artificial anything. Just really great ingredients that are quick and easy and on the go. Use my code GETFIT, GETFIT, to save 10%. And go to dropandfbomb.com today to get your packets of on-the-go convenient foods, healthy convenient foods. And it's a healthy way to drop an F-bomb today.